Have you ever found yourself wanting something, but you can't quite remember when you first decided you wanted it? It's a weird feeling, right? Like the desire just sort of appeared in your head. Well, we're going to get into that today because we're looking at how the very words we use are being reshaped to guide what we think, what we do, and, yeah, what we buy.
So let's start with a story. Let's talk about Maya. Her phone, it works perfectly fine, but all of a sudden, it just feels old. Not broken, not slow, just old. And that feeling, it didn't come from nowhere. It sort of crept in, manufactured by ads and unboxing videos and just that subtle pressure to have the latest thing. And now she feels this new kind of guilt, and it actually has a name.
And there it is, device hoarding. Now, what's so wild about this term is the spin. I mean, from a common sense point of view, keeping a phone that works is just responsible, right? But from the corporate view, oh no, that's a problem. It's a pathology. All of a sudden, being smart with your money isn't smart, it's hoarding. And this is where it all starts. Yeah, this isn't some accident. This is a deliberate process, basically rewriting the dictionary. It's about flipping words on their head to make corporate goals sound like our own personal virtues. And it's a pattern that once you start to see it, you will see it absolutely everywhere.
You know, linguists actually have a name for this. It's called semantic shift under commercial pressure. It's what happens when a word's entire vibe, its emotional meaning, gets turned completely upside down because some powerful interest with a lot of money wants it to mean something else. Hoarding used to mean, a Sears problem of accumulating too much stuff. Now, it's being twisted to mean the exact opposite, not accumulating enough. That inversion, that's the tell. So let's just run through a couple of quick examples. We hear a word like personalization, and we think, oh, great, it's tailored just for me. But what's really going on behind the scenes? Often, it's just constant corporate surveillance to build a detailed profile on you. Or how about a smart home? Sounds super convenient, but it can also just be a home that's always watching you, always reporting back. And it doesn't stop there. This language bleeds into the world of work, the gig economy. It's sold to us as freedom and flexibility, but for so many people, it's really just precarious labor with zero benefits. And the side hustle, it sounds so empowering, so entrepreneurial, but really it's just a cheerful new name for the fact that one job isn't enough to live on for a lot of us anymore. Okay, this next one is really something else. Now we have language that makes simple restraint sounds like a problem. Take underconsumption. It frames the simple act of not buying things as some kind of weird, trendy choice. And calling a break from your phone a digital detox, that implies that a basic human need, peace and quiet, is some special cleanse you have to go on, instead of just a normal part of being human.
And finally, of course, it turns inward against ourselves. The idea of optimizing yourself, it turns you from a person into a project, a system that always needs upgrading. And the wellness journey, it sounds so positive, but it has this subtle underlying message that you are perpetually unwell, always needing the next product, the next service to finally fix whatever's wrong with you.
So this isn't just an abstract game of words, right? This reshaping of language has tangible and honestly pretty shocking consequences out in the real world. It builds a whole logic that justifies incredible amounts of waste, all to protect profits instead of people. 28 million pounds. In 2018, that was the value of unsold products that the luxury brand Burberry admitted to destroying in 1 year. Not donated, not sold at a discount, destroyed. And why? The official reason was to protect brand value. Let's just translate that corporate speak for a second. When you really strip it down, protecting brand value can mean exactly this. It's a logic that says it's better to destroy perfectly good things than to let their value drop by, say, giving them to people who actually need them. Which brings us to this really powerful moral question that our source material raises. Is it okay to destroy perfectly good food while people are going hungry? I mean, the immediate gut answer for most of us is, of course not. But the logic we've been talking about, and this right here is where we get to the heart of it. Because all this focus on our behavior, our device hoarding, or our underconsumption, it isn't just about getting us to buy more stuff. It is also a brilliant and deeply cynical act of misdirection. So let's look at that term one more time, device hoarding. We've been coached to see this as the problem. But what if that first word is just noise? What if it's only there to distract us? What happens if we just take it away? What are we left with? We're left with the real issue, hoarding, not our old phones. We're talking about the massive, large-scale hoarding of wealth and resources that actually impacts our entire society.
There's a name for this technique too. It's called pattern substitution. You give people the language of criticism, a really potent word like hoarding, but you aim it at the wrong target. You aim it downwards, at regular people. It makes it feel like we're all talking about a real problem, when in reality, the actual, much bigger problem gets to continue completely unnamed and undisturbed.
So what do we do? It can feel pretty overwhelming. I get it, but this system isn't inevitable. These rules, they are not set in stone. In fact, people are already rewriting them. You always hear this, right? It's the most powerful defense for keeping things the way they are. Well, there's no alternative. That's just how the market works. But that's just a failure of imagination. And as we're about to see, it's just plain wrong. Change is already happening. Look, in 2016, France passed a law that flat out banned supermarkets from destroying unsold food. After that Burberry scandal in 2018, public outrage was so huge it forced the company to stop, which led to a ban in the UK. And just in 2023, Quebec passed a right to repair law, taking a direct shot at planned obsolescence. These aren't just theories. These are real victories that prove change is absolutely possible.
Which brings us all the way back to Maya. She sees that notification pop up, the one telling her it's time to upgrade. But this time she sees it for what it really is. It's not a helpful reminder. It's a little piece of manufactured desire, and she just dismisses it. In a world that is practically screaming at you to always want more, choosing not to, choosing to see the language for what it is, well, that can be a quiet but a really profound act of rebellion. The only question left is, what will you choose to see?
Have you ever felt just this bizarre sense of guilt for pulling out a 2-year-old phone in a coffee shop?
Oh, yeah. Like, you're somehow doing something wrong just by having older tech.
Exactly. Your current phone works perfectly fine, right? The battery holds a charge. The camera still takes great photos. But, when you set it on the table next to your friend's brand new model, you feel this weird, lingering shame.
Yeah, it's a very specific kind of modern pressure.
Right. Or consider your weekends. Have you found yourself recently calling the thing you do for fun a side hustle?
Oh, man, that phrase is everywhere now.
It really is.
Yeah.
And according to the stack of research essays and even a couple of short stories on the desk today, that guilt and that specific vocabulary didn't just, bubble up naturally from your own mind.
No, not at all. The documents we're examining today argue that it was actually engineered in a boardroom using a very specific linguistic weapon.
Yeah. And that brings us to the mission for today's deep dive. We are going to explore how these sources claim transnational corporations manipulate vocabulary to frame your own self-interest as a disease and their corporate interest as a virtue.
Which is a heavy concept, but the authors break it down really well. They basically posit that we are living through an era of modern newspeak, where language is actively being reshaped to alter our fundamental common sense.
Spot on. And from there, we'll look at the massive physical ways the authors argue this language is designed to cover up, and finally, look at the legal mechanisms some places are using to fight back. So, okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah, let's dive in. To really understand the scope of the material, we have to start with the mechanics of the vocabulary itself. The text identifies this specific linguistic phenomenon. They call it semantic shift under commercial pressure.
Semantic shift. So we're not just talking about, like, Gen Z inventing new slang on the internet.
Right, exactly. This is much more deliberate. A semantic shift happens when the underlying emotional weight of a word like its valence is completely inverted. And it happens because massive financial resources are deployed to reframe it.
And the primary example the sources use for this is the phrase device hoarding, right?
Yeah, device hoarding.
Okay, wait, let me play devil's advocate and challenge the source on this right out of the gate. Because, device hoarding sounds like a legitimate psychological issue.
Sure, it sounds clinical.
Right, like people really do keep drawers full of tangled wires, dead batteries, and obsolete electronics they are never, ever going to use again. So how do the authors differentiate between actual pathological hoarding and just, choosing not to upgrade your phone?
Well, that blurriness is exactly the mechanism the authors are highlighting. The text argues that the corporate framing takes a clinical term hoarding, which is a genuine pathology, and they slowly expand its definition.
Expanded how?
Well, they stretch it to encompass the simple act of keeping a functional object for its natural lifespan.
Oh.
Yeah, the tell, according to the sources, is the inversion of restraint. When a term implies that not accumulating new things on an annual cycle is the real pathological behavior, that's when you know the word has undergone a commercial semantic shift.
Ah, I get it. So it's essentially like an invasive species. You introduce a new phrase into the cultural ecosystem like device hoarding, and because it masquerades as helpful psychological advice, it has no natural predators.
That's a great way to put it. It just blends right in.
Yeah, it just quietly chokes out the old concept, which, used to just be called taking care of your belongings.
Exactly. And that framing aligns perfectly with the research here. Once you understand that mechanism, the sources suggest you can spot this invasive vocabulary in several distinct categories.
Right. The first one being the normalization of surveillance. The authors point to terms like personalization.
Yeah, the invasive species metaphor holds up really well there, because we don't call it corporate data extraction, we call it personalization, which sounds like a bespoke gift.
It sounds like they're doing you a favor.
Right. And we don't call it a network of microphones and cameras monitoring private spaces. We call it a smart home.
Smart home. Yeah.
The text actually argues that by attaching the word smart to these devices, the alternative is implicitly branded as stupid. So the control mechanism is masked entirely by the language of convenience.
That makes total sense.
Yeah.
Even the term community guidelines is highlighted in the notes.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
Right, because it's used to dress up unilateral platform censorship as this, like, collective democratic value.
Right.
Like, we all sat in a circle and agreed on it.
Which we definitely didn't.
No. And, there's another buzzword the sources highlight that I really want to spend a moment on, and that's sunsetting.
Ah, yes. Sunsetting.
When a tech company decides to kill off an app or a service that literally millions of people rely on, they announce they are sunsetting it. Think about how a sunset actually works mechanically in nature.
It's peaceful?
Exactly. It's natural, it's beautiful, and most importantly, it's an inevitable cosmic event. You cannot get mad at a sunset.
You'd look crazy yelling at the sun.
Right. So by using this specific word, the corporation psychologically disarms you. You aren't being deprived of a tool by a ruthless executive choice designed to cut server costs. You are just witnessing the natural life cycle of software.
Yeah, it completely removes human agency from a deliberate corporate decision. And the text argues this removal of agency is also super prevalent in a category that it calls the manufacturing of inadequacy.
Okay, walk us through that one.
So the sources point to the optimization and hustle cluster of vocabulary. Consider the phrase wellness journey.
Right.
The mechanical implication of viewing your health as a perpetual journey is that you have never arrived. You are perpetually unwell, and therefore you're perpetually in need of purchasing new interventions to get closer to a destination you can never actually reach.
Which leads right into the concept of optimizing yourself. You are no longer a person simply experiencing life. You are a biological system with metrics that need to be tweaked.
Yeah, and the sources point out the extreme end of this spectrum is biohacking.
Oh, man. I really want you, the listener, to pause and evaluate that term, biohacking. Do you view your own body as a malfunctioning piece of hardware that requires technical, commercial intervention to operate correctly?
Because that is the underlying premise of the word.
Exactly. It frames basic human biology as a flaw.
And the authors argue that once that framework is in your head, it becomes an entire identity. And conversely, when people try to step outside of that hyper-consumer identity, the language shifts to pathologize their restraint.
Like the internet trends they mentioned.
Right. The notes highlight recent trends like underconsumption core.
I have to say I had to reread that section in the notes twice to make sure I was grasping the absurdity of it. Underconsumption core. It frames the simple baseline act of buying only what you need as a quirky niche aesthetic.
It's wild. It turns not participating in the consumer cycle into just another trend to be consumed.
Yeah, or the phrase digital detox, which frames needing a break from relentless, algorithmically driven connectivity as this specialized medical cleanse.
Instead of just a fundamental requirement for the human nervous system.
Right, exactly. So if this sprawling vocabulary of modern newspeak is actively reshaping how we perceive our own behaviors, we have to look at the architects. Who was doing this?
That's the big question.
The source documents frequently reference George Orwell's 1984, where a totalitarian government enforces newspeak to narrow the range of human thought. But if we look around, there is no government ministry of truth, forcing us to call our hobbies a passion economy.
No, there isn't.
So how are we absorbing this script without a state apparatus enforcing it?
Well, the authors provide a really sharp distinction here. They argue Orwell accurately predicted the mechanism, control the language, control the cognitive boundaries, but he misidentified the vector.
The vector being who's actually applying the control.
Right. Writing in the mid-20th century, Orwell just assumed the state would be the enforcer because that was the dominant threat of his era. But the sources argue the more durable, insidious implementation turned out to be commercial. The vector is the transnational corporation.
Because a government is a highly visible target. I mean, if a state tells you what words you are allowed to say, it triggers immediate resistance.
You'd push back instantly.
Right. You can protest a state, you can point to a political leader and name them as the oppressor.
Yeah. The Ministry of Truth had to compel compliance through fear and violence. But modern corporations, the text argues, they deliver this newspeak through aspiration.
Aspiration.
Yes. The control feels like an upgrade. The state demands compliance, but the corporation simply makes you want it. By laundering the control through your own consent, the operation becomes essentially invisible.
And mechanically, it is completely decentralized.
Yeah.
There's no single dictator typing up a list of approved words in a bunker somewhere.
The sources trace the life cycle of this vocabulary, and it originates in marketing departments, PR firms, and business schools.
Then it gets deployed in press releases and product keynotes.
Exactly. Then it's unquestioningly repeated by tech blogs and media outlets, and finally, it trickles down into everyday conversation until it feels like it has just always been there.
Which brings us to that piece of short fiction included in the sources, titled The Upgrade.
Oh, yeah. That story really illustrates the cultural saturation perfectly.
It does. It follows this protagonist, a woman named Maya, who reflects on her sudden, intense desire for a new phone. And her current device is only 2 years old and perfectly functional.
Right. She doesn't actually need one.
No. But the story details how the desire didn't come from a broken screen or a failing battery. It arrived in her mind like weather.
I love that phrase. Like weather.
The author does a great job of explaining how ambient that pressure is. Between sponsored influencer posts, sleek unboxing videos in her feed, and the quiet, unspoken shame of pulling out last year's model at a dinner party. Her phone hadn't mechanically failed. It had simply become old.
Which, in her cultural ecosystem, is treated as a more severe failure than breaking.
Yeah, exactly. And the narrative highlights the exact moment Maya notices the phrase device hoarding.
She traces it back, right?
Yeah. She realizes she saw it in a headline, then heard a coworker use it jokingly, and then she found herself applying it to her own hesitation to upgrade.
It's so insidious. There's that pivotal scene where Maya mentions this term to her grandmother, who obviously grew up under a completely different economic paradigm.
Right. Her grandmother asks, "Who taught you that word?"
And Maya's defense is simply, everyone is saying it.
And the grandmother replies, "Yes, that is how it works."
It gives you chills. It perfectly encapsulates the source's argument that force creates resistance, but cultural saturation creates compliance. It just arrives as the gentle, reasonable voice of the crowd.
Okay, so if this language is successfully making us feel guilty for keeping a 2-year-old phone, what is the corporation actually doing with the phone we just traded in?
Yeah, here's where we get to the physical reality.
Right, because the authors argue that this entire psychological manipulation is actually a smokescreen for massive physical waste. They point to a deliberate pattern of misdirection.
The text categorizes this tactic as pattern substitution. The mechanics of it are fascinating. The corporation provides the public with the vocabulary of critique. They actually allow consumers to feel the satisfying moral clarity of condemning hoarding as a social harm.
But they subtly aim that critique downward at the individual consumer.
Exactly.
You aim the moral outrage at the person holding onto a functional laptop instead of aiming it upward at the individual with 4 shell companies and a private tax jurisdiction.
Yeah, the sources insist that wealth hoarding is precisely the correct term to use for billionaires because it strips away the laundering language.
Right. They argue these individuals shouldn't be called job creators or high net worth individuals because hoarding implies what is actually happening mechanically. The accumulation of surplus far beyond any reasonable human utility to the direct detriment of the surrounding ecosystem.
It's a powerful reframing. Moving from the psychological to the physical, the authors detail how this corporate language provides cover for staggering destruction of resources. The text uses the phrase, expertly engineered self-terminating products.
Which is just a brutal way to describe planned obsolescence.
It really is. And they bring up Monsanto's Terminator seeds as a primary example, which, well, It requires a bit of mechanical explanation to fully grasp just how dark it is.
Yeah, explain the Terminator seeds.
So the documents outline how Terminator seeds are genetically modified crops engineered to produce sterile seeds. Biologically, the plant grows and yields a crop, but the seeds that crop produces cannot be planted the following year.
It deliberately breaks the agricultural cycle of seed saving that has existed for millennia.
Exactly. The authors argue this is planned obsolescence weaponized against food sovereignty. The farmer is structurally forced to return to the corporation every single season to buy new seeds.
It's engineered dependency, just dressed up as agricultural innovation.
Spot on. And the sources show this identical logic applied to physical consumer goods, too. The notes detail the 2018 Burberry scandal.
Oh, this part was staggering.
Yeah, where the luxury clothing brand physically burned 28 million pounds worth of perfectly functional, unsold garments.
28 million pounds, they just burned it.
Just burned it. And the corporate justification provided to the public was that this was necessary to protect brand value.
And the author of the notes is incredibly critical of that specific phrase. They argue that protecting brand value is just more newspeak.
Oh, totally.
The underlying economic mechanic, according to the text, is that the corporation prefers physically destroying beautiful things over allowing them to be discounted and accessed by a lower-income demographic.
Because that would dilute the artificial exclusivity of the brand.
Exactly. The sources emphasize that this destruction of surplus is not some natural market correction. The phrase, the market doing what markets do, is an abstraction designed to hide human agency.
Right. The text posits that destroying surplus, whether it's burning coats or locking dumpsters full of edible food, is an active choice made by human executives to protect market pricing and shareholder value, even when that choice deprives the immediate community.
Which leads us to the second piece of short fiction included in the sources, a story titled What He Kept. The author uses this narrative to visualize the absurdity of who gets punished for hoarding.
Yeah, the setting is this near-future society where nation-states have been dissolved, and administration is handled by a transnational entity called the Efficiency Collective.
The Efficiency Collective. Just the name alone tells you where this is going.
Totally. The story follows a systems auditor named Pell. Her assignment brings her to a community food distribution hub because a 63-year-old citizen named Siazea Taufa has been flagged by the algorithm.
Flagged for what?
For a severe violation device and resource hoarding. And the mechanics of his crime are that he has maintained the same mobile communication device for 4 years and 7 months.
4 years? Oh no, the horror.
Right. And he utilized his credits to purchase a single extra bulk bag of rice for his grandchildren.
A single bag of rice. So Pell arrives to enforce the penalty, explaining the severity of the violation to Danielle, the woman managing the local food hub.
But Danielle doesn't argue the policy.
No, instead she walks Pell out to the back loading dock, points across the service road to this massive, windowless, climate-controlled facility, and explains the mechanics of what is inside.
Yeah, the facility belongs to one of the regional executive families. It houses rare earth metals, servers running high-frequency trading algorithms, and specifically highlighted in the text, 1,200 vintage guitars.
1,200 guitars.
Kept in perfect, temperature-controlled darkness, untouched and unplayed.
It's just wild. When Pell, the auditor, attempts to reconcile this massive accumulation of resources with the man she is there to penalize for a bag of rice, Danielle mimics the corporate language perfectly. She tells Pell, investment, not hoarding. It's a very important distinction.
Yeah, the author frames this as a deliberate juxtaposition to highlight the mechanical failure of the terminology. The system targets a grandfather for securing basic sustenance while legally protecting a warehouse of silenced instruments as a vital financial instrument.
So the sources spend a lot of time exposing the linguistic traps and the physical devastation they cover up. But the question that naturally follows is, how do we break out of this?
Right. If the culture is saturated with this newspeak, how do we fight back?
The authors dive into the psychology of how everyday people defend this corporate system, and more importantly, how to short-circuit that defense.
The text observes that when you confront an individual with the raw reality of corporate waste, such as a supermarket throwing bleach on edible food in a dumpster so people can't eat it, the individual will usually reach for a psychological escape hatch.
An escape hatch.
Yeah, they will acknowledge the wrongness but immediately pivot to a defense.
They say, no, it's terrible that food is wasted, but... And the authors argue that pedagogically, If you want to break the programming, you have to refuse to let that escape hatch open. You have to cut off the butt before it finishes forming.
Because the listener's butt usually relies on ambient corporate logic,
Yeah?
they haven't actually scrutinized. They'll cite logistical complexities or liability concerns or pricing stability.
Oh, the logistics are just too hard.
Exactly. To demolish those ambient excuses, the sources argue you shouldn't use abstract moral philosophy. You use concrete legislation. You point to jurisdictions where the mechanical problem has already been legally solved.
Let's examine those mechanics, because this is where the actionable solutions in the text really reside. The primary example the authors use is from France.
Specifically, they analyze the mechanics of France's loi garot, implemented in 2016.
Right.
The law fundamentally alters the logistics of retail food waste. It dictates that supermarkets above a certain square footage are legally prohibited from destroying unsold, edible food.
Legally prohibited, they just can't do it.
Right. They must establish logistical partnerships to donate it to charities or food banks, or alternatively, convert it into animal feed or compost. Deliberate destruction carries severe financial penalties.
So the argument is that when someone tries to open the escape hatch and says, but the logistics of transporting expiring food to charities are just too complex for a supermarket, you simply point to the loi garot and say, the logistics were solved in France.
Exactly.
If they argue, but it creates a massive legal liability if someone gets sick, you reply, the French legislature established liability protections to make the donations work. It proves the corporate excuses are mechanical choices, not laws of physics.
That's the key. And the sources also detail how France applied this legislative approach to technology with their 2015 law addressing planned obsolescence.
Okay, let me play devil's advocate here, because this is where a lot of people get skeptical. How do you even enforce a law against planned obsolescence? You can't outlaw entropy. Things eventually break. A phone battery degrades chemically. You just can't legislate physics.
Right, and the authors anticipate that exact skepticism, and they clarify the nuance of the legislation. The law does not mandate that a product must last forever. Instead, it targets the mechanics of opacity and deliberate sabotage.
Deliberate sabotage.
Yeah, the legislation requires manufacturers to publicly disclose expected product lifespans and provide standardized repairability scores right at the point of sale.
So it changes the information asymmetry.
Precisely. And crucially, it penalizes the intentional engineering of fragility. If an investigation proves a manufacturer used a proprietary screw specifically to prevent battery replacement, or released a software update designed to cripple older hardware, they face massive fines or even prison time.
Prison time.
Yeah. By legally mandating transparency, the law changes the financial calculus of the corporation. The legal risk of getting caught engineering obsolescence begins to outweigh the profit of forcing an upgrade.
That is huge. And the sources also preempt the dismissal that this is just, a European anomaly. To prove these legislative mechanisms are adaptable, they highlight the recent adoption of right to repair and anti-obsolescence laws in North America, specifically detailing legislation passed in Quebec.
Yeah, the authors argue that establishing these local anchors proves the alternative isn't just theoretical, it is practical, it functions mechanically, and it exists right now.
So if we synthesize the vast amount of material the authors have presented, the core thesis is really that language is an active, contested battleground.
Absolutely. The vocabulary you are handed by the ambient culture is meticulously designed to serve a specific set of financial mechanics, and those mechanics rarely prioritize the consumer or the environment.
The text argues that recognizing the semantic shift is the prerequisite for reclaiming your agency. Once you notice that a word like device hoarding is being used to punish a restraint, or a word like personalization is being used to reward your submission to surveillance, the illusion of inevitability shatters.
You realize that how things work is just a series of active, alterable choices.
And those choices, as the legislative examples prove, can be engineered differently the moment we demand it.
They really can.
To leave you, the listener, with one final thought from the documents to evaluate on your own. We have spent this entire deep dive analyzing corporate newspeak, but we haven't touched on what the authors argue might be the single most dangerous word in the modern digital vocabulary.
Oh, this is a big one.
And that word is free.
It is the ultimate Trojan horse.
It really is. The text argues that when a platform, an app, or a digital service is offered to you for free, the mechanical reality is that you are the product.
Yeah, your attention is the raw material being mined. Your behavioral data is the commodity being traded.
And your perception of reality is being quietly molded by algorithms engineered to prioritize emotional engagement and outrage over accuracy. So, the next time you're prompted to download a free app, the authors invite you to ask yourself, what is the actual currency changing hands?
Because the bill always comes due, even if it isn't measured in dollars.
Exactly. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the material. Stay curious, carefully examine the vocabulary you find yourself using, and question the origin of the script you've been handed. Until next time.